You are listening to the Keenan Vision Podcast, produced by Salesforce DevOps.net. This is episode 15, broadcast Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. Salesforce DevOps Center launches with high expectations. Let's commit. Hey everybody, it's Vern Keenan here with the Keenan Vision Podcast, and it's December 20th, 2022. And this will be the second to last podcast of the year, so happy holidays to everybody and around the world. And we're going to have one more podcast next week where I'm going to cover 2023 predictions, economic predictions. So you might want to stay tuned for that. But today we're going to go over DevOps Center and how the Salesforce DevOps Center launch is impacting the industry and what I think about it and what other people thought about it too. So this week I just published an article on Salesforce DevOps Center where I interviewed about half a dozen industry folks about what they think about DevOps Center, kind of like, well, what does it mean for all the vendors and that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to go over today. So we're all familiar, I think, with DevOps Center from Salesforce. It is a new feature built into Salesforce that lets you manage release management in a way that you couldn't do it before. So prior to this, we had a thing called change sets in Salesforce, and it's a real pain where you have to kind of like have the interface for two orgs open, and frequently, if you've ever used them, there's this thing about where they don't compile properly, and you have to bounce back and forth and resolve change set issues, and it's not there's no artifacts involved in this that you can really manage very well. So DevOps Center is a user interface that lets you get rid of the change sets and use Git to manage your change artifacts that you use to update your Salesforce database. So I've used it myself in my own org, and it's kind of easy if you use DevOps Center in the simplest way possible, which is to just simply, you install it, and don't forget to create the connected app and the installation instructions. And then after you do that, you just go in and create a new project and link a GitHub repository to it. It's got to be GitHub. And then the next thing you do is you go in and you create what's called a work item. And a work item is linked to the environments. I forgot to say you have to define the environments first. So you put in your sandbox and you put in your production org into your environment. And then you go into the sandbox and you make your changes. And then you could go into back in DevOps Center, and then you have this thing called a work item that you designate to collect all the changes you've made in the sandbox. And it does this using source tracking, which is a feature of Salesforce DX, and that's a cool way that they actually implemented this thing. So you actually have source tracking now with a button in DevOps Center. So that's actually super cool. That to me is one of the most important technical features of DevOps Center, is they have encapsulated source tracking with a user interface now in the Salesforce interface. So that's, I think, super important. And so then you do that. It collects all the changes, all the XML. It sucks it down using a SFDX pull command, essentially. And then it will package those changes into the GitHub or GitHub repository. Then you can command it to apply those changes to your production org. And it just seems to work, and it's a lot easier than change sets. So I'm converted. And I think I talked to Ian Gotts about this from Elements Cloud, and he thinks that there's 50,000 orgs out there who could use this now instead of change sets. So I think that's kind of a big deal, actually. So congratulations to the product team and Karen Fidelak for doing that primary goal. I see that as being done. But there are many, many other questions about DevOps Center that kind of surround it. I'm looking at my article here, who needs DevOps Center? Well, like I just said, everybody could use it. But there's the way that they're presenting it, the way that they're selling it, that makes it suitable for people who are involved in studying the Salesforce well-architected program. So we may be familiar with this. It's been it's a Parker Harris-led initiative within Salesforce, where they are taking a very coherent approach to telling architects and would-be architects how to build complex systems. So and DevOps Center kind of brings the well-architected program to life to some degree. So by that I mean it follows the conventions that are laid out in the well-architected program for doing release management. So it follows that particular pattern that Salesforce is trying to teach right now, how to, have a production org, and then you have a sandbox development org on one branch of your development activities, and then that can progress release artifacts down a GitHub type branch-based development strategy. When you put it through a testing org, then a user acceptance org, and other sequences of different orgs that you use for testing. And DevOps Center will facilitate those types of release management strategies now. So that's, I think, kind of a big deal that I see DevOps Center as kind of now coming in and smoothing over some of the gaps that Salesforce has had in its developer and release management strategy. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. One thing to make note of, new subject, let's talk about Salesforce DevOps Center architecture. In other words, how it's built. So I mentioned before, it uses the source tracking feature extensively. And that's important because the source tracking feature is sophisticated. It is a form of metadata intelligence. And if you've been following the blog, you know that the word metadata intelligence to me is special because it signifies sophisticated behind-the-scenes action that lets you manage the complex metadata that Salesforce uses. And source tracking does that to some degree because it handles the case of, somebody went in and changed a setting somewhere, changed, did something to a flow or some sort of low code thing in the org. Well, we can pull most, if not all of those things now using source tracking. So that's, and then you create what I call a release artifact based on that. So it's kind of like the changes that you're trying to put into a deployment, your production org. You create that in what I call a release artifact. So that's cool. The source tracking is very cool, actually. So the other thing that's interesting about the DevOps Center architecture is that they're semi-open to some degree. So when you install DevOps Center, it creates a managed package. The managed package creates a custom object in the target org called work item. And work item object has turned out to be a touchstone between products like Prodly and Elements Cloud, who actually work with that work item object to bridge in application lifecycle management tools into DevOps Center. So that was a mouthful, but basically work item lets project management tools interface with DevOps Center. And we're starting to see that with those two vendors I mentioned. They have other reasons for integrating with DevOps Center too. It's not just about ALM, but the work item object is a very interesting open architectural feature of DevOps Center. Now we're going to start getting into why DevOps Center is not a platform. And the number one reason is it doesn't have what I call a scripted command server. And most people call this thing a CI/CD engine. So it's the thing. It's usually it could be Linux itself, or it could be some other type of scripted capability where you can lay out a complicated pipeline of execution to take one sort kind of release artifact or source code artifact and apply it in a sequence of things and include everything in your pipeline, including testing, including slacking, including, everything. So that's what the scripted command server does, is it kind of creates a program, sequential program, and you could have conditionality in there, like if something fails in that script to handle your DevOps pipeline. So DevOps Center doesn't do that at all. So there's been a little bit of talk about it. In fact, that's where the talk about charging for DevOps Center came up, is if they had that kind of scripting engine, a la GitHub Actions is a scripted command server, or a CI/CD engine. So they would charge for that, just like how GitHub Actions gets charged for. So I actually hope they don't do that. I hope they just continue to use this, make this thing a tool. And the big enhancement I'm looking for would be to add a CLI, so that if I am using my own scripted command server like GitHub Actions, I could include CLI functions to command DevOps Center to do something that normally would require the user interface to make it do. So, and you may already be able to do that. I'm not 100% sure, by manipulating the the data in the custom objects. So we'll see. So that's the next. So it doesn't have the scripted command server, and other reasons why it doesn't comply with being a DevOps platform is that if you go look at the Salesforce DevOps industry map that I've put out a few times, where I have I got 9 layers and a total of 11 categories in this map that describe all the complexities of being a full DevOps platform solution. Well, DevOps Center really only covers 2 of those. It covers the repository layer, and which is the bottommost layer, and it covers the tooling layer on top of that. And it doesn't do the next layer, which is super important, which is pipeline orchestration. So that's what I was just mentioning about the command server. So it really is a tool, quite clearly. It limits itself in the way that I define it in the industry at the tooling boundary. So it would have to do a lot of other things for it to be considered a platform. It would have to do the application lifecycle management stuff better. We need metrics and observability. We got to get DORA metrics out of these types of systems all the time. There's no thing about value stream management within Salesforce at all at this point. I hope they would acquire a company that did something like that, and enabled us to have enterprise value streams tied into DevOps processes in some way, if only to get KPIs from enterprise value streams to show up on people's dashboards, things like that. Cybersecurity is another area that's neglected, and you really need that scripted command server, ways to do special integrations to get your security functions done in DevOps. Doesn't have any kind of functional testing in there at all, really. So you need partners like Provar or ExcelQ or something like that. At this point, there's no way to directly tie that into DevOps Center. Multi-SaaS capabilities. So we've got Capado and Opsera and Salto leading the way on those and on that kind of things. And Salesforce doesn't seem interested in that for obvious reasons. And finally, the thing, ancillary data management. That's the thing that Prodly does very well with Commerce Cloud and CPQ and things like that. And Salto does that. So does Blue Canvas. And none of that is talked about in DevOps Center. We can't script it. So that's why it's just a tool. And I think I beat that one to death. Okay, let's talk about some of the reactions. Ian Gotts from Elements Cloud was quite happy to point out that there's no ALM function in Salesforce DevOps Center, and that's what the integration with Elements Cloud does. Kumar Chavikula from Apsara he seems not worried at all, and points out all of the integrations that the Apsara platform currently includes, which includes also many more source control systems besides GitHub Online. Got a statement from AutoRabbit, and their emphasis is that they've integrated developer and platform cybersecurity features directly into the platform. So they were highlighting that difference. Gil Hoffer over at Salto, they have a very strong philosophy over there called business engineering. And it's kind of this idea of, it's like a fundamental idea behind a multi-SaaS strategy, where you would be able to describe configurations on a whole bunch of different systems. So I think, he's acknowledging that he actually says it's a threat to the vendors, but we have time to react, is what he said. And he also thinks that, like a lot of the other comments, like the most common chorus in all the chord and the chorus of comments was that people love the fact that Salesforce is now acknowledging that DevOps is a thing, and kind of like acknowledging the fact that all these Salesforce DevOps platforms have been needed to some degree, and they're kind of making a belated push into it, is maybe the way a lot of them are looking at it. Okay, so yeah, Gil liked it. Also got comments from Prodley. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. So getting towards the conclusion here, I think we have more coherent tools for developers and trailblazers now. So there's a DevOps homepage in the Salesforce documentation now. That's a big leap. And I think it kind of like shows how DevOps Center is kind of the binding force now between low-code developers, Salesforce DX, VS Code type developers, and the well-architected program to understand how to build critical apps and how to take them through a sequence of deployment orgs in order to have a safe and viable deployment for your to have an app digital product pipeline for your critical applications. So I think this actually takes us quite a bit further down that road, I think, where now they have smoothed over some of the gaps in there. And of course, we have to keep the pressure on, and we'll see how they're going to do from this point forward to see if they can capitalize on this and maybe do partnerships or more integrations with DevOps Center. So I think that's kind of the area we want to go in. Plus, listen to what the customers are telling them, of course. And the number one thing on the wish list there is for more source code repository compatibility. So Dave Clark from Prodley pointed out, and I talked to Ben McCarthy from Salesforce Ben about this too, and we think that DevOps Center, the impact really is on the Trailblazer community. It's on people who have admin training and are advancing and have got a lot of business experience and want to take it to the next level as a Trailblazer. And DevOps Center kind of makes that possible now. So before, you needed to be a programmer or to have developer training or skills to be able to open up a VS Code and do something with that in order to move forward or be a leader with release management. Now, with DevOps Center, it is possible for somebody purely with low-code experience to move into that role of leading a release management process for your organization. So I think that's pretty significant. I think it opens up career paths, and it also should open up progress in Salesforce customers actually developing and delivering apps that they can use and that are delivered in a reasonable amount of time. This should speed up things, if only that you now have a management function for automation built into Salesforce for release management. So, like I said, it's moving us forward, and that's kind of it. Basically, though, there are a lot of high expectations for DevOps Center. I'm encouraging people to use it, so there's going to be hopefully a lot of people out there trying it and using it, and hopefully we're also going to get some community around it. So there's going to be a lot of trailblazers out there playing with it and kind of getting used to it over the next year. And I hope that Karen and the crew at Salesforce continue to push it heavily in marketing and the Salesforce World Tours and other opportunities for them to meet users and customers. So I'm a thumbs up on it right now. Congratulations to Salesforce for getting this out finally. It was the worst vaporware product they had, so it's good to clear that off the books. Now, we'll see how it goes for the next year or two. I'll be tracking it closely here. So that's it, everybody, for Keen Vision Podcast pre-Christmas, during the holidays period in 2022. And I'll see you next week for our final podcast where I talk about 2023 predictions. So until then, let's commit. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Keen Vision Podcast. Please come visit the Salesforce DevOps.net website and sign up for email notifications of significant updates. Thanks to 10 Ton Chicken for the music, which is available on iTunes. And also be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review about how well we did on this podcast.